My name is Eliza, and this is the story of how my sister's perfect day revealed the truth about my family. I arrived at her extravagant wedding ready to celebrate, despite years of being overlooked. But when I discovered my seat wasn't with my family, not even in the reception hall, but in the kitchen with the catering staff, I finally understood my place in their lives. What happened next shocked everyone, especially when the venue owner learned who had actually paid for the entire celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Rosewood estate glittered like something from a fairy tale as I pulled into the circular driveway. Vintage Rolls-Royces lined the entrance, valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open car doors, and a red carpet stretched from the cobblestone path to the grand double doors. String lights transformed the century-old oak trees into something magical, while professionally arranged flowers formed a tunnel leading to the entrance. Even from the parking area, I could hear the string quartet playing inside. This was exactly the kind of wedding my sister Vanessa had dreamed about since childhood. Elegant, expensive, and designed to impress. Every detail showcased perfectionism, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the custom champagne flutes with gold leaf designs. Everything was immaculate, as I knew it would be. I smoothed down my navy blue dress, the one Vanessa had specifically suggested I wear, and took a deep breath before stepping out of my car. The dress was beautiful but deliberately understated, nothing that would draw attention away from the bride. I'd followed her instructions to the letter, just as I always did. The good sister. The reliable one. The one who never made waves. The valet approached with a practiced smile. "Welcome to the Blackwell-Hamilton wedding." "Thank you," I replied, handing him my keys. "I'm Eliza Blackwell, the bride's sister." Something flickered across his face, a moment of confusion quickly masked by professionalism. "Of course, Ms. Blackwell. The ceremony is about to begin. Please follow the walkway to the main entrance." I nodded and began walking toward the estate, my heels clicking against the cobblestones. Despite the valet's momentary hesitation, I felt a surge of excitement. After months of planning, countless late-night calls with vendors, and the financial arrangement no one else knew about, Vanessa's dream wedding was finally happening. What most people didn't know, what Vanessa and my parents had deliberately kept quiet, was that I was the one who had made this possible. 3 years ago, when my investment firm took off, I'd made a promise to myself. Vanessa would have the wedding she'd always wanted, regardless of our complicated relationship. So when our parents announced they could only contribute a modest amount, I had quietly stepped in, covering the remaining $85,000 without anyone's knowledge except the wedding planner and the venue owner. It was my gift, given without expectation of acknowledgement or gratitude. That was our dynamic, after all. Vanessa shined. I supported from the shadows. She commanded attention. I handled details. She dreamed. I made the dreams possible. It had been this way since childhood, and I had accepted it long ago. Or at least I thought I had. Inside the estate, the grandeur continued. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Antique mirrors reflected the warm glow of hundreds of candles. And the air smelled of roses and jasmine. Guests in formal attire mingled in the foyer, champagne glasses in hand, admiring the venue that cost more than most people's cars. "Name, please?" asked a coordinator at the check-in table, tablet in hand. "Eliza Blackwell," I said. "I'm the bride's sister." The woman's fingers scrolled through her tablet. Then came that look again, the same one the valet had given me. Confusion, followed by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Ah, yes, Ms. Blackwell." She hesitated. "You're seated at table 19. I frowned. Table 19? Where is that located? The woman glanced toward another coordinator, who approached with a tight smile. Ms. Blackwell, if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your designated area. I followed her through the main reception hall, where tables draped in ivory linens surrounded a marble dance floor. Elaborate centerpieces featuring orchids and roses adorned each table, and hand-painted place cards marked each setting. Table 1, front and center, was clearly marked for immediate family. I could see my parents' names, along with Vanessa's, college roommates and her new in-laws. My name was conspicuously absent. We continued walking, past tables 2 through 18, each filled with Vanessa's friends, colleagues, and extended family members. Finally, the coordinator stopped at a swinging door leading to what was clearly the kitchen area. Table 19 is through here, she said, pushing open the door. It's a more private setting. Private was a generous description. Table 19 wasn't a table at all, but a small section of the kitchen prep area. A folding chair had been placed beside a stainless steel counter, a single place setting arranged hastily on top. From this position, I would hear dishes clattering and staff shouting orders throughout the reception. I would be able to glimpse the celebration only when staff pushed through the swinging doors to deliver food. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice remarkably steady considering the humiliation burning through me. The coordinator's expression was sympathetic, but firm. "I'm afraid the seating arrangements were finalized by the bride personally. This is the designated spot for table 19. I stood frozen, staring at the folding chair in the kitchen. This wasn't an oversight or a last-minute change. This was deliberate. My sister had intentionally placed me in the kitchen, away from guests, away from family, away from her perfect wedding. In that moment, something crystallized within me. Years of being the invisible sister, the one who made things happen without recognition, the one who gave without receiving. It all converged in this single clarifying insult. She hadn't just relegated me to a back table or seated me with distant relatives. She had literally placed me with the service staff, as if my role in her life was purely functional. "Is everything all right?" asked a new voice. I turned to see a tall man in an impeccable suit, his silver hair and authoritative presence marking him as someone important. "Mr. Lawrence," the coordinator said quickly. "This is Eliza Blackwell, the bride's sister." I was just showing her to her designated seating. Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly as he took in the kitchen arrangement. "In here? There must be some confusion." He looked at me more closely. "Did you say Blackwell? Eliza Blackwell?" I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. His expression changed immediately. "Ms. Blackwell, would you join me in my office for a moment? I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding." I followed him through a discreet door and down a hallway to a well-appointed office. The walls were lined with photographs of the estate through various seasons, and a large desk dominated the space. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. "I'm Robert Lawrence, the owner of Rosewood Estate." "It's nice to meet you," I said automatically, years of social conditioning kicking in despite my emotional turmoil. "Ms. Blackwell, I want to personally apologize for the confusion with your seating. As the sister of the bride and, more importantly, as the person who actually paid for this entire event, your placement in the kitchen is completely unacceptable." The words hung in the air between us. He knew. Of course he knew. He had been the one to accept my payment, to agree to my request for anonymity, to promise that my contribution would remain confidential. "The arrangement was supposed to be private," I said quietly. Lawrence nodded. "And it has been. However, I cannot in good conscience allow the person who made this entire celebration possible to be seated in my kitchen. Regardless of what the bride requested, for the first time since discovering my table, I felt tears threatening. Not from sadness or humiliation, but from the simple validation of having someone recognize the injustice. "What happens now?" I asked. Lawrence leaned forward, his expression determined. That depends entirely on you, Ms. Blackwell. But I should inform you that as the contract holder for this event, you have certain rights that supersede even the bride's wishes. What do you mean? I mean, he said carefully, that while this is certainly your sister's wedding day, this is legally your event. Your name is on the contract. Your payment secured the venue. Your additional requests upgraded everything from the menu to the floral arrangements. He paused. The decision about how to proceed is yours. The implications of his statement washed over me. For years, I had accepted my position in the shadows, had convinced myself that supporting others from behind the scenes was enough. I had allowed my sister and my parents to minimize my existence because confrontation felt harder than compliance. But sitting in a wedding venue kitchen, assigned to a folding chair while everyone else celebrated in luxury I had provided, that was a step too far. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back to the person I had been just an hour ago. I looked at Lawrence, a new resolve forming within me. I think it's time for a conversation with my family. He nodded, understanding the weight of my decision. Shall I arrange a private room? No, I said, standing up. I think this conversation needs to happen right where everyone can hear it. After all, isn't that what weddings are about? Bringing families together in truth? As I walked toward the door, Lawrence called after me. Ms. Blackwell? For what it's worth, I've hosted hundreds of weddings here. The ones built on honesty are the only ones that lead to lasting happiness. I turned back with a small smile. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I think it's time for some honesty in my family. With that, I stepped back into the hallway, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Years of invisibility were about to end. The kitchen chair would remain empty, and my voice would finally be heard. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I found my sister in the bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids, women I barely knew despite having paid for their matching champagne-colored dresses. The room fell silent as I entered, 6 pairs of eyes turning toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to discomfort. Vanessa sat at the center, her wedding gown a marvel of hand-sewn lace and pearl beading that had cost more than my first car. Eliza? She looked genuinely confused by my presence. You shouldn't be in here. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I remained in the doorway, my hands steady at my sides. We need to talk, Vanessa. Privately. She sighed dramatically, exchanging glances with her maid of honor. A woman who had known her for 3 years, yet somehow ranked higher in the wedding hierarchy than her own sister. Can it wait? I'm a little busy becoming a bride right now. The room filled with nervous laughter. No, I said simply. It can't. Something in my tone must have registered because Vanessa's expression shifted from annoyance to caution. She studied me for a moment before nodding to her bridesmaids. Give us 5 minutes, ladies. After they filed out, casting curious glances over their shoulders, Vanessa turned to me with an exasperated expression. What's so important that it couldn't wait until after the ceremony? Table 19, I said. Her face remained perfectly composed, too composed. She knew exactly what I was referring to. What about it? You seated me in the kitchen, Vanessa, not at a back table, not with distant relatives. In the kitchen, on a folding chair, next to where they wash the dishes. Vanessa looked away, adjusting her veil with practiced nonchalance. The venue has limited space. We had to make some difficult decisions about seating arrangements. Limited space? I repeated, incredulous. The Rosewood Estate can seat 300 people. You have 160 guests. The head table needed to accommodate James's entire immediate family, and they're quite large. Stop. My voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. We both know this wasn't about space constraints. This was a message. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. You deliberately seated me in the kitchen because that's how you see me. As help, not family. A flash of guilt crossed her face before she masked it with indignation. You're being dramatic. It's just seating, Eliza. Not everything is about you, especially not today. Her response wasn't surprising, but it still stung. This was the Vanessa I knew well, the one who could twist any situation to make herself the victim, who could make you feel selfish for expecting basic respect. I met with Mr. Lawrence, I said, changing tack. The owner of the estate. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Why would you do that? He was concerned about my seating arrangement. Apparently, it's unusual for the person who paid for the entire wedding to be seated in the kitchen. The color drained from Vanessa's face. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I replied, maintaining eye contact. The $85,000 that magically appeared to fund your dream wedding when Mom and Dad said they couldn't afford more than $20,000. The last-minute upgrades that somehow got approved despite budget constraints. The premium open bar that wasn't in the original plan. Vanessa's shock seemed genuine, which confused me. That was Dad. He must have found a way. It wasn't Dad, I interrupted. It was me. Every cent of it. She stared at me. Disbelief etched across her features. That's not possible. You don't have that kind of money. The dismissal was so automatic, so confident, that I almost laughed. Of course she thought that. Vanessa had never shown any interest in my career, had never asked about my successes or setbacks. In her mind, I was still the quiet, unremarkable sister who existed primarily to support her ambitions. My investment firm crossed 8 figures in managed assets last year, Vanessa. I bought my condo outright 6 months ago. I've been in 3 national financial publications. I shook my head. But you wouldn't know any of that because you've never asked. Not once. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed without sound, like someone trying to solve an equation with missing variables. Finally, she managed, "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "Would knowing I paid for your wedding have earned me a seat at the family table? Or would you still have found a reason why I didn't quite fit into your perfect day?" She looked away, her silence more revealing than any answer could have been. "That's what I thought," I said softly. The door opened and our mother appeared, resplendent in her silver gown and professionally styled updo. "There you are! Everyone's looking for—" She stopped abruptly, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Vanessa remained silent, still processing the revelation about the wedding's funding. I turned to face our mother, the woman who had consistently reinforced our family's dynamic. Vanessa as the star, me as the supporting cast. "Mom," I said calmly, "did you know I was assigned to sit in the kitchen for the reception?" My mother's expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. "Well, the seating arrangements were quite complex with the Hamiltons having such a large family. I'm sure Vanessa did her best to accommodate everyone." "That wasn't my question," I pressed. "Did you know I was being seated in the kitchen, away from the family, away from all the other guests?" She hesitated, glancing at Vanessa before answering. "I was aware there was a small overflow area for some guests." "Some guests," I repeated. "Not the bride's sister, not the daughter who has supported this family in ways you don't even know about." My mother's expression hardened slightly. "Eliza, this is hardly the time for—" "For what, Mom? For honesty? For finally addressing the fact that this family has always had a hierarchy, and I've always been at the bottom of it?" "That's not true," she protested weakly. "It is true," I said, my voice steady. "And we all know it. The difference is that I accepted it for years. I played my role without complaint. I supported Vanessa's dreams, celebrated her achievements, and never asked for the spotlight myself. I gestured toward Vanessa, who was watching our exchange with wide eyes. But this, seating me in the kitchen of the wedding I paid for, this crossed a line. What do you mean the wedding you paid for? My mother looked between us, confused. Exactly what I said. The $85,000 that covered everything beyond what you and Dad contributed? That came from me, not a mysterious bonus from Dad's work, not a generous gift from the Hamiltons. From me. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she'd had for as long as I could remember. But why wouldn't you tell us? Because that's our dynamic, isn't it? I said gently. I give. Vanessa receives. I support. She shines. I make things possible. She gets the credit. That's how it's always been. My words hung in the air between us, the truth of them impossible to deny. My mother's eyes filled with tears, whether from guilt or simply the disruption to her perfect day, I couldn't tell. What do you want, Eliza? Vanessa finally asked, her voice small. It was a fair question. What did I want? Revenge? Recognition? A tearful apology? I want to be valued, I said simply. Not for what I can provide, not for how I can help, but for who I am. I want a place at the table, literally and figuratively, in this family. My mother stepped forward, reaching for my hand. Sweetheart, of course you're valued. You're my daughter. Am I? I asked. Because daughters don't get seated in kitchens, Mom. Employees do. Servants do. People who exist only to serve a function do, not family. The door opened again, and my father entered, his brow furrowed with concern. There you all are. The coordinator is having a fit. We're falling behind schedule. He paused, taking in our expressions. What's happening? Before anyone could answer, Mr. Lawrence appeared behind him. Mr. Blackwell, I apologize for the interruption, but there's an urgent matter regarding the contract that requires immediate attention. My father looked confused. Contract? That's all been settled for months. I'm afraid there's been a development, Lawrence said smoothly, his eyes briefly meeting mine. It concerns the seating arrangements. Seating arrangements? My father's confusion deepened. Surely that's not a contractual issue. Actually, it is, Lawrence replied. According to our agreement, the person who signed and paid for the venue has final approval rights for all arrangements, including seating. And it has come to my attention that there's a significant discrepancy. My father's gaze shifted from Lawrence to me, understanding slowly dawning on his face. Eliza? What is he talking about? I took deep breath. I paid for the wedding, Dad. Most of it anyway. And I just found out I was assigned to sit in the kitchen for the reception. My father's expression transformed from confusion to shock to something I rarely saw from him. Anger. Not at me, but at the situation. The kitchen? Who made that decision? All eyes turned to Vanessa, who suddenly looked very small in her elaborate gown. It wasn't personal, she said weakly. We just needed space for James's family at the main tables, and not personal? My father interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. You seated your sister, your only sister, in the kitchen, and it wasn't personal? The room fell silent. In all our years growing up, my father had rarely contradicted Vanessa. He had been as complicit as my mother in creating our family's dynamics, perhaps even more so. His sudden defense of me was unexpected, destabilizing. The familiar patterns we had all fallen into. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Daddy, it's my wedding day. Can we please just— Yes, it's your wedding day, he agreed. A day that apparently wouldn't be happening without your sister's generosity. a generosity you repaid by literally removing her from the family. The brutality of his assessment hung in the air. My mother made a small, distressed sound. Mr. Lawrence cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should give the family some privacy," he suggested, stepping back. "Wait," I said, surprising myself. "Mr. Lawrence, as the contract holder, what options do I have regarding the seating arrangements?" He straightened, all professional dignity. "As I mentioned earlier, Ms. Blackwell, the contract gives you final approval rights. You could request any changes you deem appropriate, and we would be obligated to implement them." I nodded, considering this. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically in the last 15 minutes. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I held leverage over Vanessa, the ability to significantly impact her perfect day. It was a position I had never sought, never expected to find myself in, and in that moment, I realized exactly what I wanted to do with this unexpected power. The room hung in suspended animation. My parents stunned into silence, Vanessa motionless in her designer gown, Mr. Lawrence awaiting my decision. The weight of this moment pressed down on me, heavy with years of accumulated slights and dismissals. In my hands, I held the power to rewrite today's narrative. "I would like to make some changes to the seating arrangements," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Vanessa's breath caught audibly. "Eliza, please." I held up my hand, silencing her plea. "I'm not going to ruin your wedding, Vanessa. That's not who I am. That's never been who I am." The relief that flooded her face was immediate, confirming what I had always suspected. She had never truly understood me. She had always believed I harbored the same capacity for pettiness and retribution that she did. But that misunderstanding was just one piece of a much larger pattern. I turned to Mr. Lawrence. "I'd like a proper place at the family table, not squeezed in as an afterthought, but a place that reflects my position as the bride's sister." He nodded. "Of course, we can make that adjustment immediately." "Also," I continued, "I'd like the program to be amended to include recognition of all parties who contributed to making today possible." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Eliza, that's hardly necessary." "It is necessary," my father interrupted, surprising us all again. "Credit should be given where it's due." He looked at me with something I'd rarely seen in his eyes, genuine respect. "I had no idea you were behind this, Eliza. Why didn't you tell us?" The question hung between us, layered with years of unspoken family dynamics. "Would it have changed anything?" I asked quietly. "Would knowing I was successful enough to fund Vanessa's dream wedding have made you see me differently? Or would I still have been the reliable daughter, the one who doesn't need attention because she's so independent?" My father flinched slightly at the accuracy of my assessment. For years, my supposed self-sufficiency had been used as justification for focusing family resources, emotional and financial, on Vanessa. "She needs more support," had been the constant refrain, as if my independence was a reason to provide less rather than evidence that I had learned to expect nothing. "We've made mistakes," my father admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've made mistakes. But seating you in the kitchen—" He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. "It wasn't Dad's idea," Vanessa interjected quickly. "Or Mom's. It was mine." All eyes turned to her, surprised by the admission. "Why?" I asked, the simple question carrying the weight of our entire relationship. Vanessa looked down at her perfectly manicured hands, silent for a long moment. "When," she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, "because you make me feel ordinary." Of all the explanations I had anticipated, this wasn't one of them. "What do you mean?" She looked up, tears threatening to spill onto her carefully applied makeup. "Everyone thinks I'm the special one, the successful one, the one with the perfect life. But you're the one who actually has it together. You built a business. You bought a home. You don't need anyone's help or approval. She twisted the enormous diamond engagement ring on her finger. Do you know what James said when he met you at the engagement party? He said you had quiet confidence. That you seemed like someone who knew exactly who they were. Her voice cracked slightly. No one has ever said that about me. The admission stunned me into silence. For my entire life, I had believed Vanessa saw me as insignificant, a supporting character in her starring role. It had never occurred to me that she might view me with something resembling envy. That doesn't explain why you seated me in the kitchen, I said finally. Vanessa wiped carefully at her eyes. I wanted one day where I didn't feel overshadowed by your self-sufficiency. One day where I could be the center of attention without wondering if people were comparing us. She swallowed hard. It was petty and cruel, and I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air between us, insufficient, yet undeniably sincere. 28 years of complex emotions couldn't be resolved in a single conversation, especially minutes before a wedding ceremony. But perhaps it was a start. Mr. Lawrence cleared his throat discreetly. The guests are seated, and the musicians are asking if they should begin the processional music. Reality came rushing back. 160 people were waiting. A ceremony was delayed. A wedding, however complicated its emotional underpinnings, needed to proceed. Make the seating changes, I told Lawrence, and add the acknowledgement to the program, if possible. But the wedding continues as planned. He nodded and stepped out, leaving our family alone in the sudden, heavy silence. My mother was the first to break it. Eliza, we had no idea about the money, about any of it. I know, I said. That was the point. I wanted to help without strings, without recognition. I looked directly at Vanessa. That's what family does. They support each other, even when it's not acknowledged. But it should have been acknowledged, my father said firmly. And it will be, starting today. Vanessa stood, her wedding dress rustling softly. I don't deserve your generosity, not after how I've treated you. Probably not, I agreed, allowing myself a small smile. But family isn't about deserving. It's about belonging. I paused, letting the words settle. And I've always belonged, even when none of you could see it, even when I couldn't see it myself. A knock at the door signaled the wedding planner's arrival. 5 minutes, she announced, her eyes widening slightly at the tension visible in the room. Is everything all right? Yes, I answered before anyone else could speak. Everything is proceeding as it should. After she departed, my father approached me, his expression unusually vulnerable. I'm sorry, Eliza. For everything we didn't see. For everything we took for granted. My mother joined him, reaching for my hand. We've been blind in so many ways. Their apologies were unexpected, imperfect, and incomplete. But they were a beginning. The weight of invisibility I had carried for so long hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, becoming suddenly more bearable. Vanessa stepped forward, careful in her elaborate gown. Will you still be my bridesmaid? I know I don't deserve it, but I'll be your bridesmaid, I interrupted gently. That was never in question. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. As we prepared to leave the bridal suite and begin the delayed ceremony, Vanessa caught my arm. You could have ruined everything today, she said softly. You had every right to. I studied my sister. Beautiful, flawed, and suddenly more human than she had ever allowed herself to appear to me before. That's not who I am, I repeated. That's never been who I am. And in that moment, I realized the truth that had eluded me for years. My strength had never been in my invisibility, in my ability to support without recognition. My strength was in seeing value in myself, even when others didn't. In knowing my worth wasn't determined by external validation or family hierarchy. The wedding proceeded, transformed by our confrontation yet outwardly unchanged. I walked down the aisle as planned, stood beside my sister during her vows, smiled for the photographs. But internally, everything had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't playing a role assigned by family dynamics. I was fully present as myself, seen, acknowledged, and valued. At the reception, I took my rightful place at the family table, between my parents and across from the groom's family. The revised program included a simple line: "Special thanks to Eliza Blackwell, whose generosity made today's celebration possible." It wasn't elaborate, but it was honest, a small correction to years of invisibility. Mr. Lawrence stopped by during dinner, offering a discreet nod of approval at the revised arrangements. "Well handled," he murmured. "Not everyone would have chosen Grace in that situation." "Grace wasn't what I chose," I corrected him. "Authenticity was. Being true to who I am, not who they expected me to be." He considered this, then smiled. "Even better." As the evening progressed, I noticed subtle shifts in how my family interacted with me. My father sought my opinion on investment strategies. My mother proudly introduced me to the groom's family as my daughter, the financial advisor. Even Vanessa, in the midst of her special day, made a point of publicly thanking me during her speech, acknowledging not just my financial contribution, but years of unwavering support. These changes weren't miraculous transformations. Decades of established patterns wouldn't dissolve in a single day. But they were beginnings, small cracks in the foundation of invisibility I had accepted for so long. When the dancing began, I found myself approached by James's uncle, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes. "I understand you're the financial wizard who made all this possible," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Hamilton. James has mentioned your investment firm several times. I'd love to hear more about your approach." The conversation that followed was focused entirely on my work, my expertise, my perspective. Not in relation to Vanessa, not as an afterthought, but as the central subject. It was a small interaction, but it represented something profound. Recognition of my individual value, separate from family roles and expectations. As I spoke with Richard about market trends and investment strategies, I caught my sister watching, us from across the room. Her expression wasn't jealous or resentful as I might have expected, but thoughtful, perhaps even proud. When our eyes met, she raised her champagne glass in a small private toast. I returned the gesture, realizing that perhaps the most significant change of the day wasn't in how my family saw me, but in how I saw myself. The weight of invisibility hadn't been solely imposed from outside. I had helped carry it by accepting the role assigned to me, by valuing harmony over honesty, by allowing others' perceptions to define my place. That weight was lifting now, not because others had finally recognized my worth, but because I had finally claimed it for myself. The wedding reception continued into the night, the dance floor filled with celebrating guests, champagne flowing freely, and the 5-tier cake, which I had secretly upgraded from 3 tiers, standing magnificently in the corner awaiting its ceremonial cutting. From the outside, everything appeared perfect, exactly as Vanessa had envisioned. But beneath the surface, fundamental shifts were occurring, not just in my family's dynamics, but in my understanding of myself. As I stood on the perimeter of the dance floor, watching my sister and her new husband move gracefully to their carefully selected first dance song, James's mother approached. Catherine Hamilton was the epitome of old Boston money. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, understated diamond earrings that probably cost more than most cars, and the confident posture of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. "Eliza," she said, offering a genuine smile, "I've been hoping to speak with you all evening." "Mrs. Hamilton," I replied, slightly surprised by her intentional approach. During our limited interactions at pre-wedding events, She had been polite but distant, focusing her attention primarily on Vanessa. "Catherine, please." She gestured toward the dance floor. "They make a beautiful couple, don't they?" I nodded. In agreement. Whatever complicated emotions existed between Vanessa and me, she and James did complement each other well. "Richard told me about your conversation," Catherine continued. Her voice lowered slightly. "About your investment firm and your contribution to today's celebration." I tensed involuntarily, uncertain where this was heading. The Hamilton family's wealth was substantial, the kind that had existed for generations and would continue for many more. I half expected judgment about new money or assumptions about my motivations. Instead, Catherine surprised me. "I have to say, I'm impressed. Not just by your professional success, which is remarkable for someone your age, but by your generosity. It takes a special kind of strength to give so significantly without seeking recognition." The unexpected acknowledgement caught me off guard. "Thank you, though I'm not sure remaining invisible was actually strength. Maybe it was just habit." Catherine considered this, her eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps. But today, when you discovered how your contribution had been repaid, with a seat in the kitchen no less, you had options. You could have exposed the situation publicly, withdrawn your support, created a scene befitting the insult." She smiled slightly. "Many would have. I might have." "That wouldn't have solved anything," I said. "No, but it might have felt satisfying in the moment." Catherine glanced toward Vanessa, who was now laughing with a group of friends. "Your sister doesn't realize how fortunate she is to have you." The simple acknowledgement of what I had long felt but never heard expressed aloud was unexpectedly emotional. I blinked rapidly, determined not to tear up at my sister's wedding reception. "I don't think any of us fully appreciate the people who make our lives possible," I offered diplomatically. "We see the results, not the efforts behind them." Catherine studied me with new interest. "You know, the Hamilton Foundation is seeking new board members, people with financial acumen and ethical clarity. I think you might be an excellent fit." The Hamilton Foundation was one of Boston's most prestigious philanthropic organizations, directing millions annually toward education and community development initiatives. Board positions were coveted not just for the status they conferred, but for the genuine impact they enabled. "I'm honored by the suggestion," I said carefully, "but I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of my connection to Vanessa." Catherine's laugh was genuine. "My dear, that's precisely why I wouldn't normally have considered you. Family obligations complicate foundation governance." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "But anyone who can maintain grace under the circumstances I've witnessed today, while demonstrating the financial savvy Richard described, has exactly the qualities we need." Before I could respond, the wedding planner announced the cake cutting, drawing everyone's attention to the center of the room. As I moved with the crowd, my father appeared beside me. "Having a good conversation with Catherine?" he asked, his tone casual but his expression curious. "Yes," I said. "She mentioned the Hamilton Foundation." My father raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. "That's significant. Catherine doesn't make such overtures lightly." We watched as Vanessa and James posed with the cake knife, photographers capturing every moment. "You know," my father continued quietly, "I've been thinking about our family investment portfolio. It might benefit from your professional insight." The suggestion was so unexpected that I nearly missed its significance. My father's investment portfolio was his pride, managed personally with occasional guidance from advisors he'd worked with for decades. He had never sought my input before, despite my professional credentials. "I'd be happy to review it with you," I replied, keeping my tone even despite the internal recognition that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just about today's revelation. It represented a shift in how he perceived my capabilities. As Vanessa and James playfully fed each other cake, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Robert Lawrence, the venue owner who had inadvertently triggered the day's transformations. "Your table is ready," he said with a discreet smile. I looked at him, confused. "My table? I'm already seated at the family table." He gestured toward a small door leading to a private terrace. "I took the liberty of arranging something special. When you're ready." Intrigued, I excused myself from my father and followed Lawrence through the door. The terrace had been transformed into an intimate setting. A single table elegantly set for one, with a perfect view of both the reception inside and the estate gardens illuminated by moonlight. A bottle of champagne rested in an ice bucket, and a small envelope lay beside the place setting. "What is this?" I asked, genuinely surprised. Lawrence smiled. "You made certain everyone else had exactly what they wanted today. It seemed appropriate that you should have a moment that was designed specifically for you." The thoughtfulness of the gesture was unexpected and touching. "Thank you. This is remarkable." "The envelope contains my personal card," Lawrence explained. "Rosewood. Estate hosts numerous corporate events throughout the year. If your investment firm ever requires a venue, I would be honored to work directly with you." After he departed, I stood alone on the terrace, taking in the scene before me. Through the glass doors, I could see my family, Vanessa radiant in her gown, my parents proudly watching, the Hamiltons now officially connected to our lives, the perfect tableau of a perfect wedding day. But from this vantage point, I saw something else too. I saw the complex reality beneath the perfect surface, the relationships being recalibrated, the long-established dynamics beginning to shift, the foundation of our family structure developing cracks that would allow new growth to emerge. I sat at the beautifully appointed table, pouring myself a glass of champagne. For the first time that day, perhaps for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to support Vanessa, how to maintain family harmony, how to remain invisibly essential. I was simply present with myself, acknowledging my own journey. The realization struck me with unexpected force. I had spent so long defining myself in relation to others, especially Vanessa, that I had never fully developed my identity independent of those relationships. I was the supportive sister, the reliable daughter, the invisible contributor. But who was I beyond those roles? The question felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Without the comfortable constraints of others' expectations, who might I become? What did I actually want? Not for my sister or my parents or even my clients, but for myself. As I contemplated these questions, the terrace door opened. To my surprise, it was Vanessa, still in her wedding gown, but with her veil removed, her carefully styled hair beginning to loosen after hours of celebration. "Can I join you?" she asked, unusually tentative. I gestured to the chair across from me. "It's your wedding day. You can do whatever you want." She sat carefully, arranging her voluminous skirts. "That's not true, though, is it? Today proved that there are limits to what even a bride can demand." The acknowledgement, small though it was, represented significant growth from the sister who had always expected the world to revolve around her needs. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the reception creating a distant backdrop to our private conversation. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Vanessa finally continued, "about belonging, about family." I waited, allowing her the space to find her words. "I've always known where I belonged," she admitted. "My place was at the center, with everyone else orbiting around me. It was comfortable, expected." She twisted her new wedding ring. "But it was also a prison of sorts, the constant pressure to be special, to justify being the focus of attention." This perspective had never occurred to me. I had always seen Vanessa's position as pure privilege, never considering the constraints it might also impose. "When you said you'd always belonged, even when none of us could see it, even when you couldn't see it yourself, That struck me. Vanessa looked up, meeting my eyes directly. You've never needed external validation the way I have. Your sense of self doesn't depend on being seen by others. That's a kind of freedom I've never experienced. The insight was surprisingly perceptive from someone I had always assumed lacked self-awareness. We've each had our own challenges, I offered. Different kinds of invisibility. Vanessa tilted her head, considering this. I've been hypervisible, but unseen for who I actually am. You've been invisible, but internally solid. She shook her head slightly. How did we end up so different? Family dynamics are complicated, I said. We all adapt to the roles we're assigned. But we don't have to stay in them, Vanessa replied, surprising me again with her clarity. That's what today showed me. Patterns can change, even long-established ones. From inside, the sound of the band announcing the last dance reached us. Vanessa stood, smoothing her dress. I should get back. But I wanted you to know. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I wanted you to know that I see you now. Not just what you've done for me, but who you are. And I'm grateful to have you as my sister. The admission wasn't elaborate or emotional, but from Vanessa, it represented significant growth. As she turned to leave, she stopped at the door. The Hamilton summer house in Newport has an amazing view of the water. Catherine mentioned they're hosting a foundation event there next month. You should come. She smiled, a genuine expression unlike her usual calculated charm. I think you'd fit right in. After she departed, I remained on the terrace, considering the day's unexpected evolutions. What had begun with the shock of finding myself relegated to the kitchen had transformed into something I could never have anticipated. A recalibration of family dynamics, professional recognition, and most importantly, my own understanding of my place in the world. The cracks that had formed in the foundation of our family structure weren't destructive. They were creative, allowing new possibilities to emerge, new patterns to form, new growth to begin. What had seemed like an ending, the final confirmation of my invisibility, had actually been a beginning. As I finished my champagne, watching the celebration through the glass doors, I realized that the most significant change hadn't been in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. The invisible sister had become visible, not because others finally recognized her worth, but because she finally claimed it for herself. That was the real transformation. Not being moved from the kitchen to the family table, not receiving acknowledgement in the program, not even the professional opportunities that had unexpectedly emerged. The true change was internal. The recognition that my value had never depended on external validation, that my strength had always been in knowing my worth even when others couldn't see it. As the reception concluded and guests began to depart, I gathered my belongings from the terrace, prepared to rejoin the family for final photographs and farewells. But before I left this private space that had been created just for me, I took a moment to acknowledge the journey that had brought me here. From the invisible sister to the woman who had found her voice. From the reliable supporter to the acknowledged contributor. From defining myself through others' perceptions to recognizing my independent worth. The cracks in the foundation had allowed light to enter, illuminating possibilities I had never before considered. And in that light, I could finally see myself clearly. Not as an extension of Vanessa, not as the background to someone else's foreground, but as a complete person in my own right. That clarity would guide my steps forward, informing my choices, not just within the family, but in every aspect of my life. The kitchen chair would remain empty, a symbol of a role I would never again accept. My place was at the table, any table, as an equal, valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. With this understanding firmly established, I stepped back inside, ready to conclude one chapter and begin the next, visible, valued, and finally at home in myself. The morning after Vanessa's wedding dawned with unexpected clarity, both in the pristine blue sky outside my apartment windows and in my own mind. I woke earlier than usual, despite having returned home well past midnight. Something had shifted within me, a newfound energy that made sleep seem secondary to the possibilities ahead. As I prepared coffee and settled at my kitchen island, I noticed an email from Catherine Hamilton, time-stamped 7:15 a.m. Apparently, I wasn't the only one experiencing unusual morning alertness. The message was brief but significant, an official invitation to the Hamilton Foundation Board recruitment event in Newport next month, with a personal note expressing her enthusiasm about my potential involvement. Next came a text from my father. "Breakfast this week? Would value your thoughts on diversifying the family portfolio. Proud of you, Eliza." These external validations were gratifying, of course. After years of invisibility, being seen and valued by people whose opinions carried weight felt like stepping into sunshine after a lifetime in shadow. But what struck me most was my own reaction, the calm appreciation rather than desperate gratification. These acknowledgments felt good, but they didn't define me. My worth existed independently of them. This realization was perhaps the most profound outcome of yesterday's confrontation. The kitchen chair incident had forced me to recognize not just how others saw me, but how I had allowed myself to be seen. By accepting the background role, by prioritizing harmony over recognition, by making peace with invisibility, I had been complicit in my own diminishment. As I responded to Catherine's email and arranged a breakfast meeting with my father, my phone chimed with another notification. This one was from Vanessa, a photo of her and James boarding their flight to the Maldives for their honeymoon with a simple message: "Thank you for making yesterday possible. In more ways than one." The acknowledgement was small but meaningful. Not because I needed Vanessa's gratitude, but because it represented the beginning of a more honest relationship between us. One based on reality, rather than the roles we had always played. My morning continued with routine tasks: reviewing client portfolios, answering work emails, preparing for the week ahead. But even these familiar activities felt different. I approached them not as the invisible support person I had always been, but as someone whose contributions deserved recognition, whose expertise had value, whose place at the table was earned rather than granted. This shift in perspective affected even the smallest interactions. When a junior analyst emailed a question about a client presentation, I found myself responding differently than I might have before. Rather than simply providing the answer and allowing him to present it as his own insight, I offered guidance, while suggesting he acknowledge the collaborative nature of the work. Breaking the cycle of invisibility meant not just claiming recognition for myself, but ensuring it flowed appropriately to others as well. By mid-morning, I had decided to implement another change. For years, my office had been functional, but deliberately understated. Minimal personal touches, neutral decor, nothing that drew attention. It was, I realized now, the physical manifestation of how I had positioned myself professionally. Present, but unobtrusive. Contributing but not commanding, essential but invisible. I spent an hour researching interior designers who specialized in professional spaces, ultimately scheduling a consultation with a woman whose portfolio showcased offices that were both sophisticated and distinctly personal. My workspace should reflect who I actually was, not who I had allowed myself to be seen as. Around noon, an unexpected caller appeared on my phone screen. Robert Lawrence, the Rosewood estate owner whose intervention had catalyzed yesterday's transformations. Curious, I answered. "Ms. Blackwell." He greeted me warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday." "Not at all, Mr. Lawrence, and please call me Eliza." "Eliza, then, and I'm Robert." He paused briefly. "I'm calling because our conversation yesterday has been on my mind. Specifically, your approach to a situation that would have prompted most people to create a scene or demand retribution." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply waited for him to continue. "I've been in the event business for 30 years," he explained. "I've seen families at their best and worst moments. What I witnessed yesterday, your grace under extraordinary provocation, your ability to stand firm without becoming vindictive, that's rare." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by his assessment. Though I'm not sure it was grace so much as self-preservation. Creating a scene wouldn't have served anyone, least of all myself. "That kind of perspective is exactly what I'm talking about," Lawrence replied. "And it's why I'm calling. Rosewood Estates is expanding. We're opening a new venue on the North Shore next spring, focusing on corporate retreats and executive events rather than weddings. We're assembling an advisory board to guide the development, and I believe you would be an invaluable addition." The offer was unexpected but intriguing. "That's very flattering, Robert, but I'm not in the event industry. My expertise is in financial management and investment strategy." "Precisely," he said. "We don't need more event planners, we have those. We need perspectives from the industries we hope to serve: finance, technology, healthcare. People who understand what executives actually need from retreat spaces, not what event professionals think they need." As he outlined the commitment, quarterly meetings, strategic input rather than operational involvement, potential equity in the expansion, I found myself genuinely interested, not because I needed the validation, but because the opportunity itself was appealing. It would expand my professional network beyond financial services, provide insight into a growing industry, and allow me to shape something from its inception. "I'd like to learn more," I told him. "Perhaps we could meet this week to discuss the details." After arranging a lunch meeting for Tuesday, I reflected on how differently I might have responded to this opportunity before yesterday's events. I likely would have questioned why someone would value my input, or assumed the invitation was somehow connected to Vanessa's status rather than my own capabilities. The woman I had been would have approached the opportunity with gratitude bordering on unworthiness. The woman I was becoming approached it with appropriate interest and self-respect. This internal shift continued to manifest throughout the day. When my mother called in the afternoon, ostensibly to thank me for being so understanding at the wedding, I found myself redirecting the conversation rather than accepting the implied narrative that my tolerance of mistreatment was somehow praiseworthy. "I wasn't being understanding, Mom," I said gently but firmly. "I was being authentic to who I am, but that doesn't mean the situation was acceptable." Her discomfort was palpable even through the phone. "Well, it's all sorted now. No harm done." "There was harm," I countered, maintaining my calm tone. "Maybe not permanent harm, but definitely impact. And we need to acknowledge that if we're going to move forward differently." This directness was new territory for us. Both. My mother had always avoided difficult conversations, preferring to smooth over conflicts rather than address their causes. And I had always accommodated this preference, prioritizing her comfort over honest communication. "I don't see what purpose is served by dwelling on unfortunate decisions that can't be changed now," she said, her voice taking on the slightly brittle quality it assumed when she felt challenged. "The purpose," I explained, "is ensuring those unfortunate decisions don't repeat themselves. I'm not interested in assigning blame, Mom. I'm interested in establishing new patterns." The silence that followed was lengthy enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I've never been very good at this kind of conversation." "I know," I acknowledged. "Neither have I, but I think it's time we learned." Another pause, shorter this time. "Perhaps you're right." She took an audible breath. Would you come to dinner next Sunday? Just the four of us. We could talk more about new patterns." The invitation represented an opportunity I had never expected, the chance to rebuild our family dynamics on a foundation of honesty, rather than assigned roles and comfortable fictions. "I'd like that," I said. "Thank you for suggesting it." After we disconnected, I sat with the realization that emergence from invisibility wasn't a single event, but a continuous process of small recalibrations. Each interaction, each decision, each response provided an opportunity to either reinforce old patterns or establish new ones. The path forward wouldn't be linear or simple, but it was undeniably forward. As evening approached, I decided against my usual Sunday routine of preparing for the week ahead, while half-watching whatever series I was currently streaming. Instead, I texted a friend I hadn't seen in too long and suggested impromptu dinner plans. When she expressed surprise, "On a Sunday night, who are you and what have you done with the real Eliza?" I laughed, but also recognized the truth behind her joke. I had become predictable in my reliability, defined by my willingness to prioritize work over personal enjoyment. Over dinner at a small Italian restaurant we both loved, I found myself sharing yesterday's events, starting with the kitchen chair and continuing through the confrontation, the reconciliation, and the unexpected opportunities that had emerged in the aftermath. "I'm not surprised they seated you in the kitchen," my friend said after I finished, shaking her head. "Your family has always taken you for granted. What's amazing is that you finally called them on it." Her perspective was validating but also slightly uncomfortable. "They're not bad people," I found myself saying. "They just fell into patterns that worked for them, and I never challenged those patterns." "That's very generous of you," she replied, "but it doesn't let them off the hook. You deserved better, Eliza. You always have." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for seeing that," I said quietly, even when I couldn't always see it myself. As our conversation continued, touching on her work challenges, mutual friends, and plans for the upcoming months, I realized how long it had been since I'd prioritized friendship this way. My identity as the reliable supporter, the invisible contributor, had extended beyond family dynamics to affect all my relationships. I had been so focused on meeting others' needs that I had neglected my own need for genuine connection. "We should do this more often," I said as we finished our tiramisu. "Not just when I'm having an identity crisis triggered by wedding seating arrangements." She laughed. "Agreed. Though I have to say, being seated in the kitchen might be the best thing that ever happened to you. You seem different, more present, more you." Her observation captured exactly what I had been feeling since yesterday's confrontation. I was more present, more authentically myself, because I was no longer trying to fit into the constraints of invisibility. I was emerging from the shadows not just in my family's perception, but in my own understanding of who I could be. As I returned home that evening, I passed my home office, the space where I had built a successful career while remaining somehow unseen. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of transforming it into a place that reflected my true capabilities and worth. Tomorrow, I would continue the emergence that yesterday's events had catalyzed. But tonight, I stood at my living room window, looking out at the city lights with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. The woman who had accepted a seat in the kitchen was gone, replaced by someone who recognized her inherent right to a place at any table. The invisible sister had become visible, not because others had finally seen her, but because she had finally seen herself. The journey ahead would have challenges, certainly. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, either in others' perceptions or in one's own ingrained behaviors. But for the first time in memory, I was approaching that journey not as the reliable support person, but as the protagonist of my own story, visible, valued, and finally emerging fully into the light. The following week unfolded like the first chapter of a different story, one where I was no longer a supporting character, but the protagonist of my own narrative. Each day brought opportunities to reinforce the shifts that had begun at Vanessa's wedding. Small but significant moments to choose visibility over invisibility, authenticity over accommodation. Monday morning started with my weekly team meeting at Blackwell Investments. As the firm's founder, I had always led these gatherings with quiet competence, focusing on client needs and market analysis rather than asserting my own vision or expertise. Today, I approached the conference room differently. Not dramatically, but with subtle adjustments that reflected my evolving self-perception. Before we begin our usual agenda, I said after everyone had settled, I'd like to share some changes I'm considering for our client communication strategy. The 7 professionals around the table looked up with varying degrees of surprise. I rarely opened meetings by presenting my own initiatives, typically preferring to guide discussions rather than direct them. Our current approach is effective, I continued, but I believe we can better differentiate ourselves in the marketplace by emphasizing our unique perspective on sustainable investing. I've prepared a brief overview of what this might look like. As I outlined my vision, more frequent thought leadership publications, a redesigned quarterly report template that highlighted our ethical investment framework, a potential podcast, series featuring conversations with impact-focused entrepreneurs, I noticed my team's reactions evolving from surprise to genuine engagement. "This is excellent," said Marcus, our head of client relations, when I finished. "It positions us more distinctively in a crowded field. And frankly," he added with a smile, "it's about time more people heard your insights directly. You've been the force behind our approach from the beginning, but clients often don't see that." His observation was accurate, but previously would have made me uncomfortable. The woman I had been would have deflected the recognition, emphasizing team contribution over individual vision. Today, I simply nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you. I think it's time we were more intentional about communicating our values and expertise." I glanced around the table. "I'd like to form a small committee to develop this further. Volunteers?" Hands raised immediately, more enthusiastically than I had expected. As we transitioned to our regular agenda items, I reflected on how this small shift in my leadership approach had energized the room. By claiming my vision more explicitly, I hadn't diminished others' contributions. I had actually created space for more engaged participation. This pattern continued throughout the day. During a client call, instead of my usual approach of providing analysis without emphasizing my role in developing it, I deliberately used phrases like "my assessment" and "the strategy I've developed." The client responded with increased confidence in our recommendations, even requesting a one-on-one follow-up meeting to discuss future planning. By late afternoon, I had experienced a dozen such moments, small opportunities to step into visibility, rather than reflexively retreating to the background. None were dramatic confrontations or pivotal decisions, but collectively they represented a fundamental reorientation of how I positioned myself professionally. The most significant test came at 4:30, when Daniel Morris, the CEO of a regional healthcare company and one of our largest potential clients, called unexpectedly. His company had been considering several investment advisory firms, including mine, for their substantial pension portfolio. "Eliza," he began after pleasantries, "I've been reviewing the proposals from the final contenders, and I have some questions about your approach to healthcare sector investments, given the regulatory changes coming next quarter." In the past, I might have offered to connect him with our healthcare sector specialist, defaulting to the assumption that someone else should represent our work. Today, I responded differently. "I'd be happy to address those questions, Daniel. In fact, I personally developed our healthcare sector strategy, focusing particularly on how the pending regulatory shifts create specific opportunities in medical technology and specialized care facilities." The conversation that followed was detailed and technical, allowing me to demonstrate both depth of knowledge and strategic thinking. As we concluded, Daniel's tone had shifted from professional courtesy to genuine respect. "I appreciate your insights, Eliza. Most firm principals I speak with immediately delegate sector-specific questions. Your hands-on understanding of this space is refreshing." After we disconnected, I sat with the realization that my habitual Self-effacement hadn't been serving my business any better than it had been serving my personal development. By stepping fully into my expertise rather than deflecting recognition, I had strengthened a valuable professional relationship. Tuesday brought my scheduled lunch with Robert Lawrence to discuss the Rosewood Estates Advisory Board. We met at an upscale restaurant near my office, the kind of place where business relationships are both formed and cemented over precisely prepared meals and carefully considered conversation. "I've given more thought to your advisory board invitation," I told him after we had ordered. "I'm interested, but I want to ensure I understand exactly what value you believe I would bring to the project." The question was direct in a way I wouldn't have attempted before. The old Eliza would have been grateful for the opportunity and hesitant to probe too deeply into the reasons behind it, fearing the invitation might be withdrawn if examined too closely. Lawrence seemed to appreciate the straightforwardness. "3 things specifically," he replied without hesitation. "First, your financial acumen. The North Shore expansion represents a significant investment, and having someone with your background helping guide decisions about capital allocation and return expectations would be invaluable." He took a sip of water before continuing. "Second, your perspective as someone who works with high-net-worth individuals and corporate executives. Exactly the clientele we hope to attract for corporate retreats and executive events. You understand what would genuinely appeal to this demographic, not just what event professionals think they want." "And third?" I prompted when he paused. "Third," he said, meeting my gaze directly, "the quality I observed during your sister's wedding, your ability to navigate complex personal dynamics with both integrity and strategy. Creating successful event spaces isn't just about design and amenities. It's about understanding how people interact within those spaces, how environments shape experiences. You demonstrated exceptional insight into human dynamics under extremely challenging circumstances." His assessment was thoughtful and specific, focusing on the value I could genuinely provide rather than vague platitudes. It represented exactly the kind of professional recognition I had rarely received: acknowledgement of both technical expertise and interpersonal intelligence. "Thank you for that detailed explanation," I said. "It helps me understand how I might contribute meaningfully to the project." As our lunch progressed, Lawrence shared more about the North Shore development, architectural plans, target market analysis, projected timeline. What struck me most was how he consistently sought my input rather than simply presenting information. He treated me as a valued advisor from the outset, creating space for my perspective even before any formal arrangement had been established. By the time we concluded with coffee, I had decided to accept the advisory position. Not out of gratitude for being included, but because the opportunity aligned with my interests and would allow me to expand my professional influence in new directions. "I'd be pleased to join your advisory board," I told him. "Please have your team send over the formal agreement for my review." "Excellent," Lawrence responded, genuine pleasure in his expression. "The first meeting is scheduled for July 15th. I'll make sure you receive all the background materials well in advance." As we parted outside the restaurant, he added, "I have a feeling this is the beginning of a very productive collaboration, Eliza." I smiled, extending my hand for a firm handshake. "I believe you're right." The remainder of the week continued, this pattern of small but meaningful adjustments to how I presented myself and how I responded to others' perceptions. My Wednesday breakfast with my father to discuss the family investment portfolio became an opportunity to establish new dynamics, not just professionally, but personally. "I've prepared an analysis of your current allocations," I said, sliding a folder across the table at the quiet cafe he had selected. "You're significantly overweighted in traditional energy and underexposed to emerging technologies that will shape the next decade." My father reviewed the document with the careful attention he brought to all financial matters. "This is more comprehensive than what I get from Bradford," he said, referring to his longtime financial advisor. That's because I approached it as both a professional analysis and a personal concern, I replied. This isn't just any client portfolio. It's my family's financial future. He looked up, studying me with new consideration. You've always had a good head for numbers, even as a child. I should have recognized that talent earlier. The acknowledgement was welcome, but insufficient. It's not just about recognizing talent, Dad. It's about respecting expertise. I've built a successful firm managing over $300 million in assets, but until last week, I don't think you or Mom or Vanessa really understood what that meant. My directness clearly surprised him, but to his credit, he didn't become defensive. You're right, he admitted after a moment. We've been seeing you as you were, not as you are. That's going to change. The promised change began immediately as he engaged me in a detailed discussion about rebalancing the family portfolio, asking substantive questions and taking notes on my recommendations. By the time we finished breakfast, we had established the foundation for a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than outdated family dynamics. As the week drew to a close, I realized that emergence from invisibility wasn't a single dramatic event, but rather a continuous series of choices. Each interaction presented an opportunity to either fall back into familiar patterns of self-effacement or to step forward into appropriate visibility. The cumulative effect of consistently choosing the latter was transforming not just how others perceived me, but how I perceived myself. This transformation was perhaps most evident on Friday evening, when I hosted a small dinner party at my apartment, something I had rarely done before. In the past, social gatherings had seemed somewhat intimidating, places where I naturally faded into the background rather than commanding attention. But the woman who had emerged from the shadows of Vanessa's wedding was ready to create her own spaces, to invite others into her world rather than always adapting to theirs. The evening was nothing extravagant, just 6 friends, a catered meal from my favorite local restaurant, and conversation that flowed easily from professional developments to personal aspirations. But as I looked around my dining table at the engaged faces of people I valued, I recognized yet another manifestation of my evolving self-concept. I was building not just a new professional foundation, but a more balanced personal life. One where I created meaningful connections rather than simply supporting others' narratives. As my guests departed with warm hugs and promises of future gatherings, I found myself standing in my living room with a sense of peaceful satisfaction. The woman who had been seated in the kitchen was gone, replaced by someone who knew how to create her own table and invite others to join her there. The foundation I was building wasn't just about professional recognition or family dynamics. It was about constructing a life that reflected my authentic self in every dimension. Each brick laid this week, each moment of choosing visibility over invisibility, voice over silence, self-respect over accommodation, had contributed to a structure that felt increasingly solid beneath my feet. The kitchen chair remained empty, and it always would. My place was here, fully present in the life I was creating, no longer defined by others' perceptions, but by my own clear understanding of my worth. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring challenges, but the foundation being built would support whatever came next, a foundation of authenticity, strength, and the quiet confidence that comes from finally stepping into the light. The Sunday family dinner loomed on my calendar like a question mark. Despite the shifts in dynamics that had begun at Vanessa's wedding, I approached the evening with measured expectations. Decades of established patterns couldn't be dismantled in a single week, and I knew better than to anticipate complete transformation. Still, as I selected a bottle of wine to bring and chose an outfit that felt both appropriate and authentically me, I found myself hopeful for continued evolution in our relationships. My parents' home in Brookline hadn't changed since my childhood. The same carefully maintained colonial with its manicured lawn and perfectly trimmed hedges. The physical consistency had always mirrored the emotional constancy of our family dynamics. Predictable, controlled, resistant to change. Tonight, I wondered if the familiar setting would reinforce old patterns or provide contrast to our emerging new reality. My mother answered the door with uncharacteristic warmth, embracing me briefly before accepting the wine. "This looks lovely, Eliza." "Thank you." "It's a small vineyard in Sonoma," I explained. "Woman-owned, sustainable practices. They're doing interesting work with traditional varietals." "How thoughtful," she replied, studying the label with genuine interest rather than the polite dismissal that might have been her response before. "I'll open it right away so it can breathe." In the living room, my father stood to greet me, his handshake firm but his expression softer than usual. "Eliza, good to see you. I've been reviewing those recommendations you made about the tech sector. Impressive analysis." The acknowledgement was simple but significant coming from him. "Thank you. I'd be happy to discuss them further if you have questions." "I do, actually," he said, gesturing toward the sofa. "Particularly about the healthcare technology segment you highlighted. I hadn't considered the implications of data integration for smaller regional providers." As we settled into a substantive conversation about investment trends, I noticed my mother watching from the doorway with a slightly puzzled expression. This was new territory for all of us. My father engaging with me as a professional peer rather than just his daughter. Me claiming my expertise without qualification or deference. My mother witnessing this reconfiguration of our established roles. The dynamic shifted again when Vanessa arrived, tanned from her Maldives honeymoon and seemingly relaxed in a way I rarely saw her. The sister who entered the living room wasn't the tightly controlled woman who had orchestrated every detail of her wedding. She seemed lighter somehow, less armored. "Eliza," she said, moving to embrace me with what felt like genuine warmth. "You look amazing. That color is perfect on you." The compliment was delivered without the subtle competitive edge that had often characterized our interactions. No qualifiers, no implicit comparisons, just straightforward appreciation. "Thanks," I replied, returning the hug. "The honeymoon clearly agreed with you. You're glowing." Vanessa smiled, settling beside me on the sofa. "It was incredible. Complete disconnect from everything. I didn't check email once in 10 days. I think that's a personal record." "Now that's impressive," I laughed. "More remarkable than any beach photos." "Speaking of impressive," she continued, her tone shifting slightly, "I had coffee with Catherine Hamilton yesterday. She couldn't stop talking about you." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by both the meeting and the reported conversation. "Oh? Apparently, you've been invited to join the Hamilton Foundation board? And something about an advisory position with Rosewood Estates?" Vanessa's expression showed genuine curiosity without the resentment I might have expected. "When did all this happen?" "Just this week," I replied, watching her carefully for signs of the old competitiveness. "They're both interesting opportunities that align with my professional experience." My mother appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's ready. Shall we move to the dining room?" As we relocated, I noted the formal table setting, the good china, crystal glasses, linen napkins. My mother had always reserved this level of presentation for special occasions or important guests. The effort felt significant, a nonverbal acknowledgement that this family gathering deserved the same care she would extend to those she wished to impress. "I made your favorite, Eliza," she said as we seated ourselves. "Coq au vin. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I prepared it specifically for you." The admission was small but revealing. In the past, meals had typically centered around Vanessa's preferences or what would impress whatever guests were present. This deliberate consideration of my tastes represented another step in our recalibration. "Thank you," I said simply. That was thoughtful. Dinner began with the usual exchange of news and updates. but I noticed subtle differences in how the conversation flowed. My father asked detailed questions about my firm's recent performance. My mother inquired about my upcoming plans to redesign my office space. Even Vanessa seemed genuinely interested in my perspective on a financial article she had read during the honeymoon. None of these interactions were dramatic or overtly emotional, but collectively they represented meaningful change. I was being engaged as a full participant in family conversation, rather than someone whose primary function was to ask questions and show interest in others. "So," my father said as we finished the main course, "there's something your mother and I would like to discuss with both of you." The formal introduction created a momentary tension. Family announcements preceded by such statements had historically been significant. Health issues, major life changes, occasionally disappointments requiring family unity to address. My father glanced at my mother, who nodded slightly before continuing. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since the wedding, about our family, about patterns we've allowed to develop over the years." He looked directly at me. "Patterns that haven't been fair, particularly to you, Eliza." The explicit acknowledgement was unprecedented. My father wasn't a man given to emotional discussions or admissions of error. His approach to family dynamics had always been pragmatic rather than reflective, focused on forward movement rather than analysis of past patterns. "The seating incident at the wedding was unacceptable," he continued firmly. "But it was also revealing. It made visible what had been happening beneath the surface for many years. An imbalance in how we've treated our daughters, in the attention and recognition we've distributed." My mother reached across the table, tentatively placing her hand on mine. "We never intended to make you feel less valued, Eliza, but intentions don't negate impact. We see that now." The acknowledgement was both welcome and slightly disorienting. For so long, I had adapted to their perception of me, had built an identity around being the reliable, undemanding daughter who didn't require the same attention or recognition as Vanessa. Having them explicitly address this dynamic created space for new possibilities, but also challenged the familiar structure I had learned to navigate. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "I think we've all contributed to these patterns in different ways. I could have spoken up sooner about how I felt." "But you shouldn't have had to," Vanessa interjected, surprising me with her insight. "The burden of correcting inequality shouldn't fall on the person experiencing it." She looked at our parents. "We should have seen it ourselves." This perspective from Vanessa, acknowledging not just the imbalance, but the unfairness of expecting me to be responsible for addressing it, represented perhaps the most significant shift of all. The sister who had always accepted preferential treatment as her due was now recognizing the structural inequity of our family system. "Well," my father said, clearing his throat slightly, "we can't change the past, but we can move forward differently. Which brings me to our announcement." He glanced at my mother again. "Your mother and I have decided to establish a family foundation. A relatively modest one to start, focused on educational opportunities for young women in financial services and technology." The concept was intriguing, but I wasn't immediately clear on how it connected to our discussion of family dynamics. "We'd like you to lead it, Eliza," my mother added, answering my unspoken question, "to shape its mission and direct its activities." "Me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Not both of us?" I glanced at Vanessa. My father shook his head. "This foundation should reflect your vision, your values. Vanessa has her own professional path, and she agrees this initiative should be yours to develop." Vanessa nodded. "You've built expertise in this space that none of the rest of us have. It makes sense for you to lead it." The offer represented not just an opportunity, but a fundamental reorientation of family resources and attention. For perhaps the first time, my parents were proposing to organize a significant family initiative around my expertise rather than Vanessa's needs or preferences. "I'm honored," I said, allowing myself to fully absorb the significance of this moment. I'd need to think about how this would align with my other professional commitments, but the concept is certainly appealing. Of course, my father agreed. Take whatever time you need to consider. The funds have been allocated, but all other aspects, structure, specific focus areas, governance, would be yours to determine. As the conversation shifted to the practical details of establishing a foundation, I found myself observing our family interaction from a new perspective. The kitchen chair incident at Vanessa's wedding hadn't just forced acknowledgement of existing imbalances. It had catalyzed genuine transformation in how we related to each other. My mother was actively seeking my opinion on foundation structure rather than deferring to my father's judgment. My father was engaging with my professional expertise rather than treating it as a peripheral interest. Vanessa was supporting my leadership of a family initiative rather than positioning herself at its center. None of these changes erased the accumulated impact of years spent in the shadow of family dynamics that had consistently prioritized one daughter over the other. But they represented meaningful steps toward a new equilibrium, one where each family member could be fully seen and valued for their unique contributions. As the evening drew to a close, my mother surprised me again by suggesting we meet for lunch later in the week. Just the two of us, she specified. I'd like to hear more about these professional opportunities you're considering. The Hamilton Foundation Board sounds particularly significant. The invitation to share my professional life in detail, something she had rarely expressed interest in before, felt like another small but meaningful bridge being constructed between us. Driving home through the quiet Sunday evening streets, I reflected on the ripples spreading outward from that pivotal moment at Vanessa's wedding. The kitchen chair that had been intended as an instrument of exclusion had instead become a catalyst for inclusion, for reconfiguration, for transformation. The changes weren't dramatic or absolute. Old patterns still surfaced occasionally in our interactions, habits of perception and response that would take time to fully rewire. But the awareness was there now, the recognition that these patterns existed and needed to be consciously addressed rather than unconsciously perpetuated. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath my building, I realized that the most significant ripple wasn't external but internal. The profound shift in how I perceived myself and my place, not just in my family, but in the world. The woman who had accepted invisibility had become visible not just to others, but, most importantly, to herself. This transformation continued to manifest in ways both subtle and substantial. My growing comfort with claiming my expertise professionally, my willingness to create social spaces rather than simply fitting into others, my ability to receive recognition without deflection or discomfort. The kitchen chair remained empty, and I had filled many others in its place. At the family table, at the executive boardroom, at gathering spaces of my own creation, the ripples of transformation continued to spread, reshaping not just the landscape of my relationships, but the contours of my own possibilities. 1 month after Vanessa's wedding, I found myself on the winding coastal road to Newport Road, Island. The drive itself felt symbolic, leaving the familiar streets of Boston behind for new territory, both literally and figuratively. The Hamilton Foundation Board recruitment event represented my first official step into a professional world beyond my established circles, an expansion of my influence into spaces where I had no family history or prior connections. As I navigated the final turns leading to the Hamiltons' historic summer estate, I reflected on the whirlwind of change the past month had brought. My investment firm had secured 3 major new clients, including Daniel Morris's healthcare company, drawn by my more visible leadership and clear articulation of our unique approach. The office redesign was underway, transforming my workspace from functional anonymity to a thoughtful expression of professional confidence. The advisory role with Rosewood Estates had already involved 2 productive planning sessions, with my input on financial models and client experience visibly shaping the developing project. But perhaps most significantly, The proposed family foundation had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed. My father had established the financial structure with his typical efficiency, transferring the promised funds into a newly created entity, the Blackwell Women in Finance Initiative. The name had been my choice, deliberately highlighting both family legacy and specific mission. Initial meetings with potential partner organizations, universities, professional associations, established mentoring programs, had generated enthusiasm and promising collaboration opportunities. What struck me most about these developments wasn't their individual significance, though each represented meaningful professional advancement. It was how differently I approached them compared to just a month earlier. The woman driving to Newport wasn't simply responding to opportunities presented by others or carefully managing her place within established hierarchies. She was actively creating spaces aligned with her values, confidently claiming her expertise, and deliberately expanding her influence. The Hamilton estate appeared around the final curve, a magnificent Gilded Age mansion overlooking the Atlantic, its weathered shingle exterior and expansive porches embodying old New England wealth and understated elegance. Valets in crisp summer uniforms managed the flow of arriving vehicles, while staff in white jackets directed guests toward the main entrance or the sprawling lawn where a large tent had been erected. As I handed my keys to a young attendant, I spotted Catherine Hamilton greeting guests near the entrance. When she saw me, she excused herself from her current conversation and approached with genuine warmth. "Eliza, I'm delighted you could join us." Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct. "Several board members have specifically asked to meet you. Your reputation precedes you." Just weeks ago, such a statement would have made me uncomfortable, triggering the familiar impulse to deflect attention or minimize accomplishments. Today, I simply smiled. "Thank you for the invitation. Catherine, I've been looking forward to learning more about the Foundation's work." She guided me through the house, a stunning showcase of architectural preservation and tasteful modernization, toward the back terrace overlooking manicured gardens that sloped gently toward the sea. Approximately 50 people were gathered, in small conversational groups, the atmosphere professional but relaxed. "Let me introduce you to Marcus Whitfield," Catherine said, directing me toward a distinguished man in his 60s. "He chairs our education committee, which would align well with your interests." What followed was a sequence of introductions and conversations that felt markedly different from similar professional networking I had experienced in the past. Rather than carefully positioning myself as unobtrusive but helpful, I engaged directly, sharing perspectives on impact investing in education, questioning traditional metrics for program effectiveness, and discussing the potential of technology to address systemic barriers. "You've raised excellent points about evaluation metrics," Marcus commented after a particularly substantive exchange. "We've been wrestling with exactly that issue in our scholarship program. Would you be willing to join a working group focused on developing more nuanced assessment frameworks?" "I'd be happy to contribute," I replied. "In fact, we're exploring similar questions with the family foundation I'm establishing." The casual reference to my own foundation initiative, something I would have previously mentioned only if directly asked, felt natural rather than self-promotional. I was simply identifying relevant experience and potential synergies, as any professional peer would do. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself engaged in increasingly strategic conversations, a discussion about the Foundation's investment portfolio with the Finance Committee chair, an exchange about potential collaboration between the Hamilton Foundation and my family's new initiative, a substantive debate about measuring social return on investment with several board members who had backgrounds in venture philanthropy. By the time Catherine gathered everyone for a formal presentation about the Foundation's upcoming priorities, I had established myself not as Vanessa's sister or a potential addition to their network, but as a knowledgeable professional with valuable perspective and relevant expertise. "As you know, Catherine began, addressing the assembled group from a small podium. The Hamilton Foundation is expanding our focus on educational equity and economic opportunity. To support this growth, we're seeking to add 3 new board members with specific expertise in financial services, technology innovation, and impact assessment. She outlined the formal application process, timeline, and expectations before concluding with a personal note. While this event is part of our formal recruitment process, it's also a genuine opportunity to connect with individuals whose values align with our mission. Whether you ultimately join our board or engage with the foundation in other capacities, we value the insights and relationships developed here today. As the formal presentation concluded and guests began to circulate, again, Richard Hamilton, James's father and a significant figure in Boston's business community, approached me. "Eliza," he greeted me warmly. "Catherine mentioned you've established a family foundation focused on women in finance. I'd love to hear more about your vision." The conversation that followed was exactly the kind of substantive exchange I had always valued but rarely experienced in networking contexts. Richard asked thoughtful questions about governance structure, impact measurement, and strategic focus. He shared relevant insights from his experience with multi-generational philanthropy. Most importantly, he engaged with me as a peer whose perspective deserved serious consideration. "You know," he said as our conversation drew to a natural close, "I wasn't expecting to say this today, but I think there might be interesting possibilities for collaboration between our foundations. Not just general alignment, but specific joint initiatives." "I'd certainly be open to exploring that," I replied. "The Blackwell Foundation is just getting established, but we're deliberately designing it with partnership capacity in mind." Richard nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Too many family foundations operate in isolation, missing opportunities for leveraged impact." He glanced toward Catherine, who was speaking with another group nearby. "I know the board recruitment process has its formal steps, but I'll tell you candidly that your perspective would be valuable to us, regardless of title or official role." As the event began to wind down, I found myself on the mansion's wide porch, taking a moment to appreciate the spectacular ocean view before departing. Catherine joined me, 2 glasses of sparkling water in hand. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" she said, handing me one of the glasses. 7 generations of Hamiltons have stood in this spot, watching this same view change with the seasons. "It's extraordinary," I agreed. "There's something powerful about places with such continuity." She nodded thoughtfully. "Though each generation has had to reimagine what this legacy means, how to honor tradition while adapting to changing realities." She turned slightly to face me. "That's what we're trying to do with the foundation as well. Honor the past while creating something relevant to the future." "It's a delicate balance," I acknowledged. "One my family is just beginning to navigate with our own foundation." Catherine smiled. "Based on what I've observed today, I think you'll manage that navigation skillfully. You have a rare combination of respect for established systems and willingness to question their underlying assumptions." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "That's precisely the perspective we need on our board." Before I could respond, she continued. "The formal process will continue. Of course, but I wanted you to know that your application would be very welcome." The direct encouragement was both flattering and somewhat sobering. Board membership would represent significant commitment at a time when my professional plate was already full with expanding business, the Rosewood Estates advisory role, and our new family foundation. Yet the opportunity to influence the direction of an established philanthropic organization with substantial resources was undeniably appealing. "I appreciate your candor," I replied. "I'll give it serious consideration." As I drove back to Boston, that evening the setting sun painting the coastal road in amber hues, I reflected on how dramatically my professional landscape had expanded in just 1 month. The woman who had accepted a seat in the kitchen was now navigating multiple influential roles, each representing not just personal advancement, but potential for meaningful impact. This expansion wasn't without challenges. The time requirements alone would necessitate careful prioritization and potential delegation of some current responsibilities. The higher profile these roles created would mean increased visibility and scrutiny. The overlapping relationships between business, philanthropy, and family would require thoughtful boundary management. But these were the challenges of growth, rather than constraint, of expansion, rather than limitation. They represented not problems to be solved, but opportunities to be navigated with intention and clarity. As the Boston skyline appeared on the horizon, I realized that the kitchen chair incident had catalyzed not just family recalibration, but a fundamental reimagining of my professional possibilities. The invisible sister had not only become visible, she had stepped into spaces where her perspective could shape systems, influence decisions, and create meaningful change. This wasn't the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new chapter. One where horizons continued to expand, where influence grew through connection rather than competition, where impact extended beyond personal advancement to encompass broader transformation. The empty kitchen chair had become a launching point rather than a limitation, a catalyst for growth rather than a symbol of constraint. The path ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges and inevitable setbacks, but it would unfold in landscapes. I was actively choosing rather than passively accepting. As I pulled into my building's garage, I spotted a delivery notification on my phone. The first furniture pieces for my redesigned office had arrived. Tomorrow would bring continued evolution of physical spaces to match my expanding professional presence. Small steps and significant shifts, all part of the same transformative journey. From invisibility to influence, from background to foreground, from supporting role to protagonist in my own unfolding story. The horizon ahead was wide open, filled with possibilities I was finally ready to embrace without qualification or hesitation. The kitchen chair remained empty, and in its place stretched a landscape of new opportunities, new challenges, and new potential for impact. A horizon limited only by my willingness to continue claiming my rightful place in the world. 3 months after Vanessa's wedding, life had settled into a new rhythm, busier than before, but also more fulfilling. My investment firm continued to flourish, attracting clients drawn by our distinctive approach and my increasingly visible leadership. The Blackwell Women in Finance Initiative had established partnerships with 3 universities and was preparing to launch its first mentorship program. My role on the Rosewood Estates Advisory Board had expanded to include chairing the Client Experience Committee, where my perspectives on luxury service delivery were actively shaping the new property's development. And yes, I had accepted the invitation to join the Hamilton Foundation Board, finding unexpected synergies between their established programs and our family's newer philanthropic efforts. These external developments were matched by continued evolution in family dynamics. Sunday dinners had become regular occurrences, characterized by more balanced conversation and genuine interest in each person's pursuits. My mother and I had established a weekly lunch tradition, gradually bridging decades of emotional distance. Even Vanessa and I were developing a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competitive positioning, discovering common ground we had never previously explored. It wasn't perfect. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, requiring conscious redirection. But the trajectory was unmistakably positive, moving toward more authentic connection and equitable recognition. On this particular Wednesday morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual, drawn by the peaceful productivity of early hours. The space itself had been completely transformed. The previously neutral decor replaced by thoughtfully selected artwork, comfortable yet professional furnishings, and design elements that reflected both my aesthetic preferences and professional identity. It was a physical manifestation of my internal evolution, a workspace that demonstrated confidence rather than self-effacement. As I reviewed the day's calendar over coffee, my assistant Rebecca buzzed through on the intercom. "Eliza, there's a call for you. Gabriela Vega from Meridian Partners. She says it's important but not urgent. Should I schedule a time later today?" The name was immediately familiar. Gabriela Vega was something of a legend in financial services. Founder of Meridian Partners, one of the largest woman-owned investment firms in the country, with offices in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago. She was known for innovative approaches to sustainable investing and for creating pathways for women in finance, both causes close to my heart. "I'll take it now," I replied, curious about the unexpected contact. "Eliza Blackwell." Gabriela's voice was warm but direct. "Thank you for making time this morning. I've been following your work with interest, particularly your emphasis on ethical investment frameworks for generational wealth transfer." "That's kind of you to say," I responded, genuinely pleased by the recognition from someone I had long admired from a distance. "Your firm's approach to integrated impact metrics has been influential in how we've structured our own evaluation systems." What followed was 30 minutes of substantive professional exchange, discussing market trends, regulatory shifts, and the evolving landscape of socially conscious investing. The conversation flowed easily, characterized by mutual respect and shared perspectives despite our firm's different scales and focus areas. As the call seemed to be drawing to a natural conclusion, Gabriela shifted to what I sensed was the real purpose of her contact. "Eliza, I'm not one for extended preliminaries, so I'll be direct. Meridian is establishing a Boston office and we're seeking someone to lead it. Based on your track record, professional reputation, and alignment with our values, I believe you would be an exceptional candidate for the position." The offer was so unexpected that for a moment I wasn't sure I had heard correctly. "You're offering me a position heading Meridian's Boston office?" "I'm suggesting we explore the possibility," Gabriela clarified. "This would be a partnership track position, with significant autonomy to shape the Boston operation, while leveraging Meridian's established infrastructure and reputation. We envision the Boston office focusing particularly on sustainable tech, investment, and next-generation wealth management, both areas where you've demonstrated expertise." My mind raced with implications. Leading Meridian's Boston expansion would represent extraordinary professional advancement, greater resources, wider influence, enhanced prestige. But it would also mean stepping away from the firm I had built, potentially reconfiguring my recently established roles with the Family Foundation and other commitments. "I'm honored by your interest," I said carefully. "It's certainly intriguing, but I would need to understand a great deal more about the vision for the Boston office and how it would align with my current professional ecosystem." "Of course," Gabriela replied, approval evident in her tone. "I wouldn't expect otherwise from someone with your strategic mindset. Why don't we arrange a more detailed conversation next week, perhaps in person? I'll be in Boston on Tuesday and Wednesday." After scheduling a lunch meeting and concluding the call, I sat in momentary stillness, absorbing the significance of what had just transpired. 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, such an opportunity would have seemed unimaginable. Not because I lacked the qualifications, but because I had positioned myself in ways that made such recognition unlikely. The Invisible Sisters simply didn't attract attention from industry leaders like Gabriela Vega, but the woman who had emerged from the kitchen chair incident was different, more visible, more confident in claiming her expertise, more deliberate in expanding her influence. And that transformation had created ripples extending far beyond family dynamics to reshape my professional possibilities. My reflection was interrupted by a calendar notification. A planning call for the Family Foundation's mentorship program was starting in 5 minutes. I connected to the video conference, still processing the Meridian conversation, while engaging with our program director and university partners about launch logistics. "We've received over 100 applications for the initial cohort," reported Sarah Chen, our newly hired program director. The quality is exceptional. These young women represent exactly the demographic we hope to reach. That's wonderful, I responded, genuinely excited despite my preoccupation with Gabriella's offer. Have we finalized the selection criteria framework? The next 45 minutes focused on practical implementation questions, evaluation rubrics, mentor matching processes, program assessment metrics. Throughout the discussion, I found myself thinking about how the Foundation's work might intersect with a potential role at Meridian. Rather than seeing them as competing commitments, I began to identify potential synergies, ways the increased resources and visibility of a Meridian position might actually enhance the Foundation's impact. When the call concluded, I had just enough time to review materials for my next meeting, a quarterly review with one of our most significant clients. As I prepared to leave my office, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "Your brother-in-law is here," she said, curiosity evident in her expression. "James Hamilton. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." This was unexpected. While James and I had established a cordial relationship, particularly through the Hamilton Foundation connection, we weren't close enough for impromptu office visits. "Send him in," I said, adjusting my schedule mentally. "And please let the Arlingtons know I may be a few minutes late for our review." James entered looking polished as always in a perfectly tailored suit, though his expression suggested something more serious than a casual drop-by. "Eliza, thank you for making time. I apologize for arriving unannounced." "No problem at all," I replied, gesturing toward the seating area. "What brings you here today?" He settled into one of the chairs, his posture reflecting the confidence of someone accustomed to executive spaces. "I've just come from a meeting with my father and several members of the Hamilton Group board. A situation has developed that I believe you should be aware of, particularly given your involvement with the family foundation." The Hamilton Group was the private investment company that managed the family's considerable business interests, separate from the philanthropic foundation I had recently joined. James served as its CEO, having stepped into the role 2 years earlier as part of a carefully orchestrated succession plan. "I'm listening," I said, intrigued by the unusual circumstance. "The board has been evaluating opportunities to expand our healthcare division," James explained. "We've been in preliminary discussions with several potential acquisition targets, including Northeastern Medical Technologies." The name registered immediately. Daniel Morris's company? Daniel was the healthcare CEO whose pension portfolio had recently become one of my firm's major clients. James nodded. "Exactly. It's a promising target. Innovative technology, strong market position, excellent management team. But we've just learned that Artemis Capital has entered the picture with a competing offer." Artemis Capital was one of the most aggressive private equity firms in the Northeast, known for acquiring promising companies, extracting maximum value through cost-cutting and restructuring, then reselling the streamlined assets. "If Artemis acquires NMT," James continued, "they'll likely dismantle much of what makes the company valuable: the R&D division, the employee-centered culture, the community commitments. It would be profitable for shareholders in the short term, but devastating for the company's long-term potential and its employees." I was still unclear on why James was bringing this to me. "This is concerning, certainly. But how does it relate to the foundation or to me?" James leaned forward slightly. "2 reasons. First, as both Daniel Morris's financial advisor and a Hamilton Foundation board member, you have unique relationships with both sides of this potential transaction. You might be able to facilitate conversations that wouldn't otherwise happen. This made sense, though it would require careful navigation of potential conflicts of interest. And the second reason? The Blackwell Women in Finance Initiative," he replied. "NMT has one of the most progressive women's leadership development programs in the healthcare industry. Their VP of Innovation, Lydia Chen, has built an impressive pipeline of female talent in technical roles. If Artemis acquires the company, that program will almost certainly be eliminated as a non-essential expense. The connection clarified his presence in my office. This wasn't just a business matter, but one that intersected with causes I had publicly committed to advancing. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, wanting clarity on his expectations. "Nothing improper," James assured me. "Simply that you might be uniquely positioned to broker introductions and perhaps facilitate understanding of mutual interests. The Hamilton Group's approach to acquisition would preserve exactly the values and programs that align with your foundation's mission." As James outlined the specific ways I might appropriately support communication between the parties, I found myself struck by the multi-layered significance of this situation. 6 months ago, I would never have been in a position to influence such a transaction. The invisible sister simply wouldn't have had the network connections, the recognized expertise, or the confidence to engage at this level of business strategy. But the woman who had walked away from the kitchen chair had developed something more valuable than just professional credentials. She had cultivated authentic relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. Daniel Morris respected my financial guidance. The Hamiltons valued my perspective on their foundation board. Both relationships had developed because I had stepped fully into my expertise rather than minimizing it. "I'll need to think carefully about the appropriate boundaries here," I told James as our conversation concluded. "But I appreciate you bringing this to my attention." The Leadership Development Program at NMT is exactly the kind of initiative our foundation aims to support and replicate. After James departed, I found myself standing at my office window, looking out at the Boston skyline while processing the morning's unexpected developments. In just a few hours, I had received a career-changing offer from Gabriela Vega and been invited to help shape a significant business transaction with implications for causes I deeply valued. Neither opportunity would have materialized for the woman who accepted a seat in the kitchen. Both had emerged because I had claimed my rightful place at the table, professionally, personally, and within my family. The empty kitchen chair had become a launching point for expanding influence and impact in ways I could never have anticipated. As I gathered my materials for the client meeting I was now definitely running late for, I realized that the true transformation wasn't just in external recognition, but in internal permission, allowing myself to occupy spaces of influence without qualification or apology, to leverage connections for meaningful outcomes, to envision possibilities beyond traditional limitations. The path ahead would require careful navigation of complex relationships and potentially competing commitments. But it would unfold in landscapes of opportunity rather than constraint, of possibility rather than limitation. The kitchen chair remained empty, and in its place stretched horizons I was only beginning to explore, each step forward revealing new vistas of potential impact and meaning. 6 days after Gabriela Vega's unexpected call and James Hamilton's surprising visit, I found myself at a corner table in Sorellina, one of Boston's most respected restaurants. The elegant setting seemed appropriate for a meeting that could potentially reshape my professional future. Gabriela had suggested the venue, noting that its relative privacy would allow for candid conversation about the Meridian Partners opportunity. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit developed over years of professional life. This brief window of solitude provided valuable space to center my thoughts and review my carefully prepared questions. The past week had been a whirlwind of research, reflection, and strategic conversations with trusted advisors. While I hadn't reached a decision about the Meridian position, I had developed clarity about what I needed to know before one could be made. Gabriela arrived precisely on time, her presence commanding attention even in a room accustomed to power players. At 58, she embodied the confident authority that comes from building something substantial entirely on one's own terms. Her firm managed over $15 billion in assets across 3 offices, with a client list that included some of the most progressive family offices and institutional investors in the country. "Eliza," She greeted me warmly, extending her hand. Thank you for making time. I've been looking forward to continuing our conversation. After brief pleasantries and ordering, Gabriella shifted seamlessly into the purpose of our meeting. I suspect you've spent the week considering the implications of what I proposed. Let me provide more context about our vision for Boston and why I believe you're the right person to lead it. What followed was a detailed overview of Meridian's strategic expansion plan. Boston represented not just geographic growth, but programmatic evolution, an opportunity to develop new service models focused on next-generation wealth, with strong emphasis on impact investing and technological innovation. We're not looking to simply replicate our existing operations, Gabriella explained. Each office has its own identity within the broader Meridian framework. Boston would be built around your particular expertise and vision, leveraging our established infrastructure but maintaining significant autonomy. That's compelling, I acknowledged, but it raises questions about integration. How would my current client relationships transition? What latitude would I have in building a team? Gabriella nodded approvingly, clearly appreciating the substantive nature of my questions. Those are exactly the right considerations. We've developed a careful onboarding process for existing client relationships, with flexibility to maintain continuity while gradually introducing Meridian's expanded resources. She outlined a thoughtful approach to team building, one that would allow me to bring key staff from my current firm while accessing Meridian's talent recruitment capabilities for specialized roles. The proposed compensation structure included not just substantial base and performance components, but an accelerated partnership track with meaningful equity participation. This isn't about absorbing your practice into Meridian, Gabriella emphasized. It's about creating something new together that neither of us could build alone. Your expertise in ethical investment frameworks combined with our scale and established systems could produce something truly distinctive in the marketplace. As our conversation continued through lunch, I was struck by how different this professional negotiation felt compared to previous career discussions. I wasn't approaching the opportunity from a position of gratitude for being considered or concern about proving my worth. Instead, I was evaluating a business proposition based on its strategic alignment with my goals and values. There's one additional aspect we should discuss, I said as we neared the end of our meal. My commitments beyond my investment practice, particularly the family foundation and my board roles. These aren't peripheral interests, but core components of my professional identity. Gabriella's response reflected genuine understanding rather than mere accommodation. That integration of business leadership and community impact is precisely what attracted us to you. Meridian has always operated at the intersection of financial performance and positive social influence. Your external commitments strengthen your value to our organization rather than competing with it. She paused, considering her next words carefully. In fact, we would see the Blackwell Women in Finance initiative as a potential collaborative partner rather than a competing commitment. Meridian has resources that could potentially amplify its impact. This perspective, viewing my foundation work as complementary rather than competitive with a Meridian leadership role, shifted my thinking about potential conflicts and constraints. Rather than requiring compartmentalization, this opportunity might actually create synergies across different aspects of my professional life. As we concluded lunch with agreement to continue discussions following a visit to Meridian's New York headquarters the following week, I found myself genuinely energized by the possibilities this opportunity represented. Not merely professional advancement, but true alignment, a role that would leverage my expertise, values, and connections in service of greater impact. From Sorrelina, I went directly to my next appointment, a carefully arranged coffee with Daniel Morris at a quiet cafe near his company's headquarters. Following James Hamilton's visit to my office, I had reflected carefully on how to approach the potential acquisition situation without overstepping ethical boundaries or creating conflicts of interest. I had ultimately decided that transparency, with all parties was the only appropriate path, not advocating for any particular outcome, but ensuring that decisions were made with complete information and clear understanding of all options. "Daniel," I greeted him as I joined his table, "thank you for making time today." "Always good to see you, Eliza," he replied warmly. "Though I admit your message intrigued me. Something too sensitive for a regular office meeting?" His perceptiveness provided a natural opening. "Yes, though not in the way you might think. I've become aware of a situation that intersects with several of my professional relationships, including our work together. I wanted to discuss it directly to ensure complete transparency." Daniel's expression shifted to careful attention as I outlined what I knew about both the Hamilton Group's interest in NMT and Artemis Capital's competing approach. I was meticulous in clarifying that I wasn't representing either potential acquirer, nor was I advising him on the business decision itself that would fall well outside my role as his pension fund advisor. "My concern," I explained, "focuses specifically on one aspect of NMT that might be overlooked in standard acquisition analyses: your Women's Leadership Development Program and Innovation Pipeline. Having learned about this program through my foundation work, I believe it represents significant value that could be preserved or lost, depending on which approach to acquisition prevails." Daniel studied me with new appreciation. Most financial advisors wouldn't consider that aspect relevant to the transaction. "I'm not approaching this purely as a financial advisor," I clarified. "I'm speaking as someone who recognizes the long-term value of what you've built at NMT, not just in market terms, but in human capital and organizational culture." "Lydia would be gratified to hear that her program registered on anyone's radar during acquisition talks," Daniel said, referencing his VP of Innovation. "She's built something remarkable, but it's exactly the kind of initiative that typically gets eliminated in corporate restructuring." Our conversation continued with careful navigation of appropriate boundaries. I provided objective information about the Hamilton Group's approach to acquisitions based on publicly available data and my knowledge from the Foundation Board. Daniel shared insights about what he valued most in NMT's culture and what he hoped to preserve through any ownership transition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.